Good afternoon, everyone. It is now 2:30, and we will be commencing our study session. I see that we've got our council member Kelly is online. Do we need to take a roll call vote, Mr. City Clerk?
No, not at this time, but the record will reflect that all council members are present, with the exception of council member or Mayor Pro Tem Harnick, who will be a few minutes late.
At this point, Mr. City Clerk, would you like to begin? Which should we take first?
We'll begin with the city council roles and new laws and elections update. Give me 1 second. Okay, Honorable Mayor and City Council, I'm Anthony Mejia, City Clerk, and I'm joined by Ann Branham of Best and Krieger, and today we're going to review some new laws and changes related to the Brown Act, our boards and commissions, the role of liaisons and alternates, ballot designations, and the Levine Act. To facilitate remote participation in legislative body meetings, Assembly Bill 2449 provides for council members to remote participate for just cause and emergency circumstances, which include family caregiving needs, illness, disability need, physical or family medical emergency, or travel on official public business. A member may not use the provisions of AB 2449 for a period of more than 3 consecutive months or 20% of the regular meetings in a calendar year. AB 2449 will sunset in January 2026. Most recently, the legislature passed AB 557, which updated the procedures established under Assembly Bill 361. The two main updates are the legislative body may conduct teleconference meetings during a proclaimed state of emergency by the governor to determine whether or not meeting in person presents imminent risk to health and safety, or where the body has already determined by majority vote that such risks are present. And 2, the agency must renew its findings in support of continued teleconferencing meetings every 45 days. AB 557 does not have a sunset date. Of course, council members still have the option to remote participate under traditional Brown Act requirements, which include posting the agenda at the teleconference location so that it may serve as a satellite location for public participation. Regarding the city's boards, commissions, committees, and task forces, also known as appointed bodies, city staff wants to inform the city council of its intent to work with the appointed bodies to develop annual work plans similar to the city council's goal setting. Due to the nature of the body's work, certain appointed bodies will be exempted, such as the Planning Commission, Architectural Review Commission, Marketing Commission, El PASEO Board, and possibly the Finance Committee. These work plans will be approved by the appointed body and submitted on the consent calendar for city council ratification. It's been reported to city staff that the city council liaisons have been taking an active and participatory role during some of the appointed body meetings. As a reminder, the Palm Desert Municipal Code states that city council liaisons should facilitate communication between the city council and appointed bodies. A council liaison is not a member or advocate of the appointed body and does not give direction or influence decisions, but can assist and provide information. Furthermore, alternate liaisons are welcome to observe their assigned appointed body, but the alternate liaison should give deference to the primary member unless absent. Regarding ballot designations, the city has historically allowed the titles of mayor and mayor pro tem to be used as ballot designations in previous elections. However, I've become aware that the election code only allows for the use of the elective office which the candidate holds at the time of filing the nomination documents to which the candidate was elected by vote of the people, and the candidate should provide a copy of the certificate of election as supporting documentation. Therefore, going forward, candidates may not use the titles mayor or mayor pro tem as ballot designations. However, candidates may still make mention of such roles and titles in their candidate statement. Furthermore, with the city's transition to 5 single-member districts, currently elected council members may not use the term incumbent as a ballot designation unless they are directly elected from said district. In our case, Mayor Quintanilla is the only potential candidate who may use the term incumbent, having been previously elected from District 1. All other members may use up to 3 words to describe their elected office and current principal profession, vocation, or occupation, such as council member/business owner. And finally, I'd like to introduce Ann Branham, who will go into detail regarding recent amendments to the Levine Act, which imposes new regulations related to campaign contributions.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm going to go ahead and give you just a quick update on the Levine Act, which is also, you may have heard reference to the bill number SB 1439 over the last couple of years. And so thank you very much. That slide's perfect. So under the previous rules, which you may not have even been aware of because they didn't apply to city council members, the Political Reform Act, of which the Levine Act is a part, stated that campaign contributions could be considered a source of income and had to be reported and triggered recusal requirements, but only for appointed boards, which was why before it did not apply to city council members. However, in 2022, when the new bill passed, the Levine Act was changed so that appointed and elected officials now can potentially have a conflict under the Levine Act. And we'll get into a little more of the details of what triggers the conflict. But in general, a campaign contribution of more than $250 aggregate over a year is what triggers that obligation. So that's the number that I want you to be aware of, but we'll talk a little bit more about the details. And then the situations in which that recusal requirement or declining to accept a donation exceeding that amount is if you are involved as a council member in a proceeding. So that would be something like a hearing or an action item on your agenda for a license, a permit, entitlement, and most contracts, with the exception of contracts that are competitively bid, labor contracts, and personal employment contracts. So those are going to be some pretty narrow exceptions. For the most part, if the city council is taking any sort of action where there is a party on the other side of it, you're going to need to be aware of these campaign contribution restrictions so that you can be sure to be compliant with the law. So could we go to the next slide, please?
Can I interrupt before you go to the next slide?
Absolutely.
I had one resident who looked through the material and said, so if someone donates, for example, 300 and something comes back, can someone return the amount to go back under the threshold in order to participate?
Yes, so there is the option to return a donation in order to, cure a potential violation. The only issue is that you sometimes will have a time limit on when you can return it. And so as long as, let's say the decision was made, which triggers the 12-month prohibition on voting on proceedings relating to that person, you'd have to make the return of the money. Let's see, I have the statute pulled up here so I can give you the exact information. So if you're in that 12-month period after the decision has been made that implicated that person, and then they make the donation of $300 to the campaign, and you're in that 12-month window, you can cure the violation by returning the contribution, or this is potentially relevant here too, the portion in excess of $250. So you don't necessarily need to always return the full contribution. You might, in that case, only return the $50. And then that's within 14 days of accepting or soliciting or directing that contribution. So say they make the contribution on February 1st, and you're aware that in December you had made a decision involving that person, so you're in that 12-month window. If you take the donation and then realize, say, 3 days later that that person was a party in that proceeding, you would have 11 more days, a total of 14-day window, to return the money to proceed with decisions implicating that person. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you very much.
No problem. It's a kind of a tricky statute. You do typically have the option to return the money. What I would caution you to be aware of is that there may be a tight timeline with that. And so as soon as you become aware of it, I would recommend reaching out to the city clerk or to legal counsel.
Mayor and Council, if you will just give us a few minutes, she's left the meeting room and we'll try to get her reconnected. And she's back.
Hi, sorry, I rejoined on my phone. My computer has totally locked up. So if that comes back, then I will get back on there. But the good news is I can see the slideshow from my phone. So sorry about that delay. Okay, so I think that resolved the question. Were there any follow-up questions, or shall I continue?
You can continue.
Okay, perfect. So the general idea, and I do have a helpful graphic that I think will illustrate this on the next slide, but the general idea here is that while the proceeding is pending, so say, you become aware that you're going to have an entitlement decision to make as the council on a conditional use permit, let's say, for the duration of the actual proceeding, and then for the 12 months that follow, you as officers of the city, elected officials, cannot then accept, solicit, or direct contributions of more than $250 from anyone who was a party to that CUP proceeding. Using the same example, an agent of that party. So for example, if it's a homeowner and they had their architect come and make the presentation, it extends to that person's agent as well, or a participant or participant's agent in the proceeding. And the way that participant is defined is essentially someone who lobbies on behalf of the project. So more than just a standard public commenter at a meeting, but not to the level of having to be a party to the proceeding. And I have a specific definition on the following page. So this applies to contributions to you, your campaign directly. And if you direct a contribution to some other fund, then that would trigger the rule as well. And then for contributions that follow the final decision, so say you grant the CUP and then afterwards the contribution is made, you can cure the violation. This is what we were talking about before, if you return it within 14 days. And there are certain conditions to be met, but those are kind of deep in the weeds on the statute. So if you're interested at any point in making a refund of a donation, a contribution, then I would recommend reaching out as soon as possible. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. Okay, so when it comes to, hold on one, I'll wait for, okay, perfect. So when it comes to if the donation has been made, the contribution has been made prior to the time in which you're going to be considering a decision involving the person who made the contribution. So there's sort of two windows of time here, and this is what the graphic will illustrate. You have the 12 months that precede the decision that you're making, and then you have the 12 months that postdate the decision. So if a donation has already been made at some point in the past 12 months, and then the decision comes before you, the obligation at that point is to disclose on the record that the contribution has been made in the past 12 months, the identity of the person who made it and their relationship to the proceeding. And then you would, unless you were going to make the return of the contribution, you would not participate in the proceeding at all. So just like with a regular conflict of interest, which I'm sure you've had occasion to encounter before, you would just recuse yourself formally on the record and state that the reason was because of, the application of the Levine Act and that you had received a campaign contribution. So you're recusing from that action. And then, as we mentioned, that would not apply if you had returned the contribution. So it's a slightly different timing requirement when we're looking backwards at the contribution. If you return it within 30 days of the person making it, that essentially frees you up for future looking items. But what that means is you could not make a decision if the contribution had been made more than 60 days or, really more than 30 days ago, 31 to 12 months ago, because you wouldn't have the correct amount of time to return the contribution at that point. So it's a bit confusing because the timeline is different for if the contribution was made before the proceeding versus after, but just something I wanted you to be aware of, to think about. You may have the option still to have returned it and go on with the proceeding. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so I hope this is helpful. It's how I kind of think about it in my head when I'm analyzing these issues. So if you think about the date of your actual decision that you're making, you put that at a point in time, let's say it's June 1st, then you have separate obligations that apply the 12 months before that date of June 1st. So from June 1st of the last year up until that date. And then you have separate obligations that apply from June 1st of now going 12 months into the future of the next year. So I've briefly described these, but in the 12 months before, if you've received contributions, you either had to have returned them within the time limit, or if you're outside the time limit or you don't want to return them, then that's when you would disclose and recuse yourself from making that decision. when the proceeding happens, so June 1st, 2024, for the next 12 months, and while you're involved in the proceeding itself, you are precluded from accepting donations from that person, the participant, a party to the proceeding, or their agent. And so the general rule is just to be aware, keep a good list of your campaign contributions, and then be ready, when council items come up, to compare your list of donors with items that you may be asked to make a decision on, so that you know if you have a duty to recuse or to make a refund of the contribution. Next slide, please. Just a couple more. So these are the definitions. I just wanted you to have them in case they come up at any point. But when there are obligations that apply based on whether someone is a party to the proceeding, a participant in the proceeding. And so there's a bit of a difference there. So the party would be the person who actually filed the application or is the subject of the application, the homeowner, for example, in a CUP proceeding. And then their agent would be, like I said, the architect or engineer involved in the project who attends city council meetings on their behalf. So that would be a party and their agent. A participant is any person who's not a party, so they're not directly named in the proceeding, but they are actively supporting or opposing a particular decision in the proceeding. And so, like I said, this is not just like your standard neighbor who might get up and comment on the project, but it would be someone who's actively engaged in trying to get the project across the finish line, or pushing back against the project and trying to not have it passed. And then the proceeding at issue that would trigger this requirement is really going to be anything that comes before the council, except for these narrow contract carve-outs, which are competitively bid contracts, labor contracts, personal employment. So for the most part, any decision that's made by the council is going to trigger the requirement to at least be aware of these obligations and determine if anyone has made a contribution that could cause you to have to recuse. Next slide, please. And then this is just a discussion again of the concept of agent. So I won't go over that again. And then, so there's not, I guess what's helpful to think about in this context is if you have a company that is a party to the proceeding and they're sending their agent, someone who works for that company, to actually physically come to the council meetings, the agent and the company are both prohibited from making a donation in their own name. So just something to be aware of. It's not like it's just the company and they can get around it by sending one single person to present at the meeting. It applies to the company and to their agent. So just to be aware of that. And then I think one more slide, please. So, and then there's also obligations on the other side. So you as council members have obligations, but the statute does clarify that the party and the participant have obligations to disclose and not to contribute. So it's sort of a both ways thing where you have obligations to recuse, disclose, not accept. They also have obligations to state on the record when they get up, I made a campaign contribution on X date to X council member, and they are supposed to not donate or contribute to your campaigns for the 12 months after that decision. So you could prosecute essentially both ways. You could look at it as a violation by the council member. If you accepted, you could also look at it as a violation by the person who was involved. Statute cuts both ways. So something to be mindful of. And then, now I think one more slide. Oh, perfect. Okay, so that was my last slide. So I'm available for any questions you might have. As I mentioned, it's a weirdly complicated area, and every situation is going to look a bit different when they come up. I like to say that with conflicts, no two are exactly the same. So don't be alarmed if it sounds like a lot to keep track of. That's what we're here for. I hope this was a helpful overview, at least, so that you kind of have your sensors up for what to think about with campaign contributions going forward. But like I said, if you ever have questions about it, please feel free to reach out. I've included my email there, and then Isra's email is there as well. So I'll pause there and see if there are any questions.
Thank you. That was concise and clear, and the slides were very helpful, not only to us, but to members of the community if they should have questions or as things become a little bit more fluid with understanding. So thank you very much. I appreciate you.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be here virtually.
Which item is next?
Madam Mayor, the next study session will be on the topic of the farmer's market.
And who will be presenting on the farmer's market?
Yeah. Good evening, Mayor, members of City Council. Eric Sad, Director of Economic Development, uploading the PowerPoint now. But today we wanted to respond to the City Council and provide an update on the two farmer markets that are here at the City of Palm Desert. We do have the original Certified Farmers Market presented by the Palm Springs Cultural Arts Center, as well as the Certified Farmers Market. These events or both markets are actually held at Entrada El Paseo on Highway 111 in El Paseo. The first farmers market, if I get the next slide, is on Wednesdays between 8 and 2 p.m. It's held through October through May. It's through a for-profit operator. And this event and farmers market is not sponsored by the city. However, the original certified farmers market is a city-sponsored market for a nonprofit operator. Look at the next slide. What we did is we took a look at our two farmers markets, our level of sponsorship for them, as well as some of the marketing that the cities helped to push forward for them, which you can see here in the table. We also took a look at markets that are valley-wide and to look at what levels of marketing and sponsorship were provided for those markets. You can see through this table, there are no other financial or city contributions in Indio, Indian Wells, La Quinta, or Rancho Mirage, with the one exception being Rancho Mirage, which does consider it a city event and does assist with providing mailers to residents in proximity and well as other additional promotion through social media channels. Really, what we want to show you in the next slide, though, is what we've heard from operators, both operators, is the site is a beautiful site. However, it's quite hidden. And so there's limited visibility along Highway 111. And so we've looked at alternative locations for these markets. When San Pablo Avenue first opened with its new improvements, we held a farmer's market there. At the time, many of the local businesses on the street felt that the market was pretty disruptive, and that was a Wednesday market at that time. But the street itself can accommodate the markets. There's electrical and water that's available for the businesses that would utilize that space. And when we met with the merchants on San Pablo late last year, they were more open to having events come back to the street. We also contemplated Civic Center Park being a location. There are other park uses that occur here, and we need to take a closer look at how those farmers markets and other events here may come into conflict, particularly on the weekends, and also look at a couple of municipal code changes to allow something like that to occur here at the Civic Center Park. We looked at a recently acquired asset at the shops at Palm Desert. Here, we think there's ample parking to accommodate the events. There's plenty of visibility on Highway 111. There are some utilities for electrical in the area, but we need to explore the site a little further to see if there's still water availability there. But right now, we're going to want to move forward with working with the operators and looking at an alternative location for. And that completes our report.
So I just want to make sure I'm clear on this. They do not want to be at Entrada del Paseo.
I think ultimately, what I hear from both market operators is they have a problem distinguishing themselves from one another. They're held at the same location. They're just on different days. And so they think there's some confusion from the public on who's operating, and they do have some different vendors. They have complained about visibility, particularly with access from Highway 111 into the site. And so we've been looking at an alternative location for.
Okay, so I understand the visibility issue. How does not being able to distinguish one from the other matter?
I'm not sure that it matters to us here, but for the operators, it matters to them.
And how? Do we know that? Or
Ultimately, I think that they're in competition for one another to secure vendors and to have patrons come to the
okay, so
center.
it's probably mostly about the vendors who they secure for the, okay, thank you.
Well, that was my question. That's the second question of Councilmember Harnick, because I think most people don't know the difference, but I guess if you're a regular farmer's market shopper, maybe you do. Although now you've also clarified it's more of a vendor issue. So I don't really have a question anymore.
Two things. Do the organizers pay any sort of rent or fee to use the space?
They do not.
Okay. And second, is there any more, what municipal codes are presenting a hurdle for potential use of the Civic Center Park? That would have to be dealt with.
There's a specific code related to how we use the parks and being able to use them to sell and advertise for specific businesses. We would have to go back in, probably take a look at the permitting process as well as make some municipal code amendments to do that.
Okay, another question. Okay, so when we first had it on San Pablo, it was when San Pablo had first come to be what it is today. And you said perhaps they're open now to events. Have we had a chance to talk to the merchants on San Pablo to see if that's something that they would welcome?
We haven't yet, but we are scheduled to meet with the merchants on February 8th.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
So are you looking to us to give you direction on location, or this is just informational right now at this
This was
point?
meant to be informational.
Okay.
In terms of the shop's location, so you're saying the question is there may be water or there is water?
There is landscape water. I don't know that we can tie into that for their needs. So we may need to look at other improvements or look at other facilities that they can use. We need to explore it a bit further.
I know that for other community uses, I'm not sure if it would apply, but I know that, for example, there are organizations that will bring like mobile showers. So I know that to some extent there is some water that they tap into or other water that they bring. It would be very helpful if we would know, again, if possible, to measure how much water they use, to know, would it be a little bit, would it be a lot? Does that mean that some sites are just completely out of the question so we can help narrow it down? Thank you, this is great. I don't see any other questions from my peers. Mr. City Manager, thank you.
Okay, I'd like to turn over the next item to Richard Canoni on the Cotino development update.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Richard Canoni, Director of Development Services. I wanted to give just a brief overview of the Section 31 or Cotino development and just where they are and how that affects some of our intersections within the city. So just a brief overview. There was a specific plan that was approved for Section 31 that includes roughly 175,000 square feet of commercial uses, just under 2,000 residential units, 400 hotel keys, all sort of around a center 34-acre, they call a Crystal Oasis Lagoon. There has been 3 phases of phase 1. There's 3 components of that have been approved, and you see the image to the left is right from their retail site, or I'm sorry, from the realtor site. That includes the 516 residential units that were approved. They also went ahead and approved a clubhouse and restaurant adjacent to the lagoon. Recently, the city also approved phase 1 of Town Center. That includes 2 restaurants, a retail and restaurant sort of line of buildings, just over 25,000 square feet. It also includes what they call an artisan village, where there's some smaller 100 to 200 square foot shops that will be closer to the beach, as well as a back of house building and restroom. One thing to note, that the town center will be open to the public. This is just a quick site perspective of how that phase 1 will look with the lagoon. To the left of the screen on the bottom, where that's not labeled, that is that restaurant and clubhouse built that will just be for the residents. And then again, this is just the overall site plan, where you can start to see where what they're calling Gallery View Way will tie into Monterey. So within the specific plan, they were required to to include an access and circulation plan. So if you look at the map, the larger circles, if you will, are essentially the intersections that will have a signal. The blue or greenish color are for residential access, and the red, if you see the little red, like a H to a certain extent, are gates for those access points. Everything in red are the access points to serve the town center, and it'll include two signalized intersections, one on Gerald Ford, a modification of the existing one at Shadow Ridge, as well as two right-in, right-outs. And I have an aerial I'll get to after this. We also looked to see how they're, if they were modifying their bicycle facilities and how that would affect, if at all, anything that we had to do with our bike lanes, as well as looking at it through the overall network. And looking at the general plan for Rancho Mirage, they have designated this as a class 2, which is existing. So we're not seeing any modifications to the bike lanes on the Rancho Mirage side of Monterey. We have been working to coordinate the efforts between our staff as well as Rancho Mirage. And so just wanted to highlight a few of those items. Any of the construction traffic management plans are reviewed by both the city engineer and public works. So that's something that they will look at, including any haul outs for the dirt as they excavate for that lagoon. Traffic and intersection and signal improvements are being reviewed by our city engineer. Within their approval, there were some 2 traffic improvements related to the 2040 both general plans that Public Works, CIP, and Development Services is looking at. And 2 of those intersections were at Portola and Country Club, where there were some additional turn lanes and their fair share contribution to those improvements at 13%, as well as some turn lane modifications at Monterey and Fred Waring, where the amount of traffic that's anticipated at 2040 would be a fair share of approximately 3%. And so those are things we're continuing to monitor. One of the other things we started to explore and have a discussion with, and Martine can provide a lot more detail on this, is the management of those traffic signals along Monterey. Rancho Mirage does not participate in CV Sync, and so that was something that we looked at to see whether or not it made sense for us looking at our entire network, whether or not we should explore the management of those and potentially shared costs. And so again, we're just in the infancy of those discussions. And just to give you an overview of kind of the aerial of where we are today. So you see the sort of the faded out lights that I have on. Those are the access points for the residential. The ones highlighted in yellow are the 2 serving the commercial, as well as the 2 right-in and right-outs, and of course the existing signal at Gerald Ford. The only other item I wanted to mention, we are in the process of reviewing plans now for that intersection at Monterey and Shadow Ridge. We have gone through 2 reviews. Both of those the city engineer rejected. We wanted to make sure that there would be no negative effects to that intersection at Shadow Ridge. There was one of the initial proposals. There's both the decel lane as well as an acceleration lane that they were proposing to modify, and we were not supportive of that. So we want to make sure that that intersection continues to be aligned and would not negatively affect Shadow Ridge on our side. And so that's something we're continuing to work through. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions, or Martine on the traffic management.
Just to clarify, 1,932 total units at build out, including on that first slide, the future residential, right?
Correct.
Perfect. And I noticed the bulk of the proposed bike lane improvements were in Cathedral City and unincorporated Riverside County, across the interstate, like Barner Road. Who bears the burden of the cost on that?
Those will, I don't recall seeing any of those within I'll go back and double check the mitigation. I was focusing on the city, but when they prepared their bicycle facility plan, it does include the surrounding municipalities. And so they would be responsible. I don't have an answer as to whether or not, but I can find out if there was any payment to those municipalities.
I have a question. Oh,
Okay, and I thank you for this because this really is important to Palm Desert. So I really appreciate this report. Are we working with CVAG and the TAC committees about what this is going to do with the Monterey interchange? And where are we going to be? And we do a good job, I think, with CVAG at trying to figure out percentage who pays for it and that sort of thing. But I think it's something we need to get out in front on.
Yeah, if I could jump in, we're definitely coordinating with Rancho Mirage, with Public Works Director over there. As mentioned before, they don't necessarily want to be participants in the CV Sync project, but if we can coordinate getting all the video detection inserted onto all the intersections, and then they can pay us for their fair share, I think that'll help us in the long term to coordinate all the entire corridor.
Okay, and what concerns me, I mean, I know they're not involved with CV Sync or CV Link or those sorts of things, but what concerns me is the Monterey interchange at the Monterey and the 10, because we're not going to have the capacity. The capacity that is currently there will not accommodate when we look at the housing starts they have, and some of them that we have, it's not going to be accommodated. It just won't work. So I'm just wondering if we can get out ahead and try and figure out who's paying for what. And again, it's a percentage basis. I understand that. But I think we need to bring it up to CVAG and try and figure this one out.
We'll follow up with them as well.
Thank you.
and I was going to ask, when are they going to start selling the first homes? How long do we have to prepare before homes start selling and it impacts our infrastructure? Like Councilmember Harnick just brought up, because the interchange is already backed up. You can go there pretty much any part of the day, but especially rush hour, and it's just jam-packed.
I believe they've started. I don't know if it's just deposits, but it's my understanding they're in the process or they have opened the sales center, so they are beginning to actively sell some of those homes. I think they're starting with the age restricted initially, but I don't know that they've started for the other non-age restricted.
Mhm. So it's more than just taking a reservation. People are actually purchasing the homes now.
My understanding is it might just be the reservation, but I can find that out for sure.
Okay. I was just wondering how long we have until this becomes a viable community.
We were surprised they moved as quickly as they did with phase 1 of the town center.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you. My peers have brought up some excellent questions. Councilmember Kelly, do you have any questions?
No, everyone has covered them. I'm confident staff will stay on top of this.
Thank you. I would like to go back to something that was brought up. You said they would look at the monitoring regarding the cameras and the traffic. How would that be calculated, or did I hear that correctly?
So along Monterey, the corridor, we have shared intersections. And so right now we pay for some portions of things, and then they pay us for other intersections they monitor. We're trying to work with them to make sure that we have a cohesive plan, to make sure that we're coordinating, of course, traffic circulation right along that corridor. So we're in the process of putting together a plan that's basically a unified system for that entire corridor based on all the traffic that's coming and projected. We can provide a backup plan or a backup sort of presentation to give you an idea of what they are responsible for and what we're responsible for, and then come back with you with a presentation of what we're going to agree to.
I would appreciate that, especially as we're looking at the details of their project is great, but we have to assure the impact for us. And I absolutely support that this is something where we should involve CVAG and see how else we can push, because I think the impact is not something that a lot of folks are processing quite yet. And as mentioned, if they went that fast, we're not going to have a lot of time. So thank you, Councilmember Nastande, for bringing up and how the timeline is here quickly.
That was all of our study session updates today. Got closed session scheduled at 3:30, Anthony.
Thank you so much, everyone. We will see you back at 3:30.